Superstition. You're walking down the street and there's a ladder directly in your path. You could walk under it. There's nothing dangerous about it. The ladder's stable, nobody's working above. But you pause. You step around it instead. Why? You don't actually believe it would cause bad luck. You're not irrational. But the thought crosses your mind. What if? That tiny hesitation, that flicker of doubt, that's superstition. Your brain trying to control what can't be controlled by inventing rules that don't exist. And even when you know it makes no sense, you follow it anyway. Superstition feeds on uncertainty. When you can't predict an outcome, when things feel random, your mind hunts for patterns. It searches for anything that might tilt the odds in your favor. An athlete wears the same socks to every game. A student sits in the same seat for every exam. Someone refuses to say the number 13 out loud. These aren't harmless quirks. They're safety rituals. Small actions that create the illusion of control when there is none. The mechanism is straightforward. You do something before an event. The event goes well. Your brain links the two. It doesn't matter that they have nothing to do with each other. Next time, you repeat it. If it works again, the connection hardens. If it doesn't, you don't abandon the ritual. You adjust it. Maybe you didn't do it correctly. Maybe you need to add another step. The cycle feeds itself. What started as coincidence becomes a rule you can't break. And it's not just you. Entire cultures run on shared superstitions. Don't open umbrella indoors. Don't break a mirror. Knock on wood to keep bad luck away. These aren't just old traditions. They're collective coping tools, ways entire groups manage fear. And because everyone around you follows them, they feel real. The trap works quietly. At first, you tell yourself you don't really believe it. You're just being careful. But the ritual stops being optional. Skip it once, and you feel uneasy. The discomfort grows. You start avoiding situations where you can't perform it. What began as a harmless habit turns into dependency. The more you lean on it, the harder it becomes to stop. Superstition doesn't just offer fake control. It punishes you when you break the pattern. Miss your lucky routine before a presentation, and if things go badly, you blame yourself. Not because the ritual was real. Because you failed to follow it. That's how it locks in. It claims credit when things go well. It assigns blame when they don't. And it does this while contributing absolutely nothing. Magical thinking. A child blows out birthday candles and makes a wish. Harmless. But what happens when that same belief carries into adulthood? When someone's convinced that thinking hard enough about something can make it happen? That their thoughts alone can bend reality? This is magical thinking. The belief that your mind directly controls the outside world, even when there's no actual connection between the two. It's not hope. It's not positive thinking. It's the conviction that what happens in your head shapes what happens out there, without any real mechanism in between. And it shows up everywhere. Someone thinks about an old friend they haven't contacted in years. That friend calls the next day. Instead of calling it coincidence, they decide their thoughts caused it. Someone refuses to say a fear out loud, convinced that speaking it will make it real. Words become spells. Thoughts become forces. The psychology is pattern recognition gone wrong. Humans are built to find cause and effect. Touch fire, get burned. That's learning, but the brain doesn't always verify the link. It just connects events that happen close together in time. You wore a certain shirt. You got good news. The brain saves that. Next time you want good news, you reach for the same shirt, certain it played a role. Stress makes it worse. When life feels chaotic, when outcomes slip out of reach, the mind hunts for control. If you can't change what's happening, you adjust your thoughts, your words, your mental rituals. You convince yourself these internal moves have external power. It's a way of feeling like you're doing something when you're not. The danger is the illusion of influence. Someone preparing for a job interview spends hours visualizing success. Every detail, every response. They believe this mental rehearsal tilts the outcome. When they get the job, they credit the visualization. When they don't drop the belief. They decide they didn't focus hard enough. Or doubt crept in and sabotaged it. The system survives every failure because it's built to. Magical thinking also warps responsibility. If thoughts shape reality, bad outcomes become your fault. You didn't think positively enough. You let negativity in. Normal setbacks turn into personal failures. Instead of recognizing that most events are shaped by forces outside your head, you blame yourself for every loss. It's proof you didn't try hard enough mentally. Thoughts do have power. How you think shapes how you act. Actions change outcomes. But magical thinking skips that middle step. It treats thoughts as actions themselves, as if wanting something hard enough rewrites the world. And the more you believe it, the less you question it, until influence and fantasy blur into one. Ritualized behavior. Every morning, same order. Coffee first. Check emails. Shower. Get dressed. Nothing strange about routine. Everyone has one, but somewhere along the way, routine stops being convenience and becomes necessity. Miss one step and the entire day feels wrong. That shift from habit to ritual happens quietly. Routine is about efficiency. Ritual is about control. When you believe the order itself protects you, when skipping a step feels like inviting disaster, you've crossed into ritualized behavior. The actions stay the same, but the reason behind them changes completely. Athletes know this well. A basketball player bounces the ball exactly 3 times before every free throw. A pitcher tugs his cap, adjusts his glove, taps the mound. Same sequence. Every time. They'll tell you it's focus. Preparation. But watch what happens when the sequence breaks. Panic sets in. Not because the action mattered, because the belief in it did. The brain builds these loops under pressure. Uncertainty makes you search for anything that feels stable. You find something that worked once. You repeat it. It works again. The ritual forms. Soon, you're not doing it because it helps. You're doing it because not doing it feels dangerous. The ritual becomes the anchor, and you're terrified to let go. It spreads beyond performance. Someone who survived a car accident starts checking their mirrors in a specific pattern before driving. A student who asked an exam while wearing a certain jacket won't take a test without it. The logic never holds up under scrutiny. But logic isn't driving this. Fear is. And ritual is how fear disguises itself as preparation. What makes it insidious is how reasonable it feels. You're not being superstitious. You're being thorough. Careful. The ritual gives structure to chaos. It makes randomness feel manageable. But underneath, you're building a dependency. The more you lean on the ritual, the more you convince yourself it's necessary. Eventually, you can't separate the action from the outcome. They fuse. Breaking the ritual feels like breaking the protection. So you don't. You add to it instead. 1 step becomes 2. 2 becomes 5. The ritual grows until it consumes more time and energy than the task itself. And you accept it because the alternative, facing uncertainty without the safety net, feels impossible. Lucky object belief. There's a pen sitting in someone's desk drawer. Nothing special about it. Cheap, plastic, barely writes anymore. But they won't throw it out. They used it to sign an important contract once. Things went well. Now, they keep it. Just in case. Lucky objects work by hijacking meaning. You take something ordinary, a coin, a bracelet, a worn-out shirt, and you assign it power it doesn't have. Then you carry it everywhere. Not because it does anything. Because you believe it does. And that belief changes how you feel when you have it versus when you don't. The mechanism is simple association. You were a specific item during a moment of success. Your brain links the two. Next time you face something similar, you reach for the object. Not for practical reasons, for emotional ones. It becomes a psychological anchor. When you hold it, you feel more confident, more prepared. The object hasn't changed, but your perception of yourself has. It's everywhere. A musician keeps a guitar pick from their first big performance. A businessperson wears the same tie to every major meeting. A traveler carries a small token from a place where something good happened. They'll admit it's irrational, but they won't leave without it. The object isn't the source of success. It's the trigger for a mental state they've learned to associate with it. What starts as comfort becomes dependency. You begin to need the object. Forget it at home, and anxiety spikes. You second-guess yourself. You feel exposed. The object was never doing anything, but without it, you've lost the psychological boost it provided. And that loss feels real, even when the power wasn't. The trap tightens when something goes wrong despite having the object. Instead of questioning the belief, you adjust the ritual. Maybe you didn't hold it correctly. Maybe you should have touched it more often. The failure doesn't break the illusion. It deepens it. You convince yourself the object still works. You just need to use it better. Lucky objects don't grant luck. They grant the feeling of control in situations where control is limited. And sometimes that feeling is enough to shift behavior. Confidence affects performance. But the moment you credit the object instead of yourself, you've handed your agency to something that has none. You stop trusting your ability and start trusting a piece of metal, fabric, or paper that means nothing beyond what you've projected onto it. Omen Interpretation. A black cat crosses your path. Does that mean something? Most people would say no. It's just a cat. But some people pause. They notice it. They remember it. And when something goes wrong later that day, they connect the two. The cat wasn't random. It was a warning. A sign they should have paid attention to. This is Omen Interpretation. The practice of reading meaning into random events and treating them as predictive signals. A broken mirror. A bird hitting a window. A sudden chill. These things happen constantly. But when you're looking for patterns, when you want the universe to give you guidance, ordinary occurrences start feeling like messages. The psychology runs on selective attention. You notice what you're primed to notice. A gambler sees a penny on the ground heads up and takes it as a sign to play. They win once, and the belief cements. But they ignore the dozen times they saw the same penny and lost. The pattern isn't real. It only appears real because you're filtering out everything that doesn't fit. Culture reinforces this. Societies pass down lists of supposed omens. Spilling salt, seeing a shooting star, hearing a crow at dawn. These aren't universal truths. They're inherited superstitions. Stories repeated so many times they feel like facts. And because everyone around you treats them seriously, you start to as well. The collective belief gives individual omens weight they don't deserve. What makes Omen Interpretation dangerous is how it distorts decision-making. Someone considering a major choice, a job offer, a relationship, a move, looks for signs. They see something they interpret as negative. A red light on the way to the interview. A broken shoelace before a first date. Instead of recognizing coincidence, they take it as cosmic advice. They pull back. They hesitate. Not because the situation itself changed, because they've let randomness dictate their response. It also creates a feedback loop. You interpret an omen as bad. You act cautiously. The outcome is mediocre. You credit the omen for warning you, convinced that ignoring it would have been worse. But you'll never know. The omen didn't predict anything. You fulfilled its prophecy by changing your behavior based on a belief that had no foundation. The universe isn't sending signals. Events happen without regard for your decisions. A car breaks down. A storm rolls in. A bird flies past your window. These things don't mean anything about your future. But when you need certainty and none exists, omens offer an answer. A false one, but an answer nonetheless. And sometimes, false certainty feels better than no certainty at all. Curse belief. Someone tells you you're cursed, maybe as a joke, maybe seriously. Either way, the thought sticks, and then things start going wrong. Small things at first. You spill coffee, miss a deadline, argue with a friend, nothing unusual, but now you're watching, and every setback feels like proof. Curse belief is the conviction that you've been marked by bad luck, that some external force is actively working against you. It doesn't matter if the curse is real. What matters is that you believe it. And once you do, the belief starts shaping everything. The mechanism is expectation. When you believe you're cursed, you start looking for evidence. Your attention narrows. You notice every negative event and ignore the positive ones. A normal day has ups and downs. But under curse belief, the ups disappear. The downs get magnified. You're not experiencing more bad luck. You're just filtering out anything that doesn't fit the narrative. And then the behavior shifts. You become cautious, hesitant. You stop taking risks because you're convinced they'll backfire. You avoid opportunities because you expect failure. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling, not because the curse has power. Because your belief in it changes how you act. You create the outcome you feared. It doesn't stop there. Curse belief spreads socially. You start telling people about it. They respond with concern, or they dismiss you. Either way, the belief strengthens. If they're concerned, it validates your fear. If they dismiss you, you feel isolated. Both reactions reinforce the idea that something is wrong, that you're different, marked. The psychological cost is exhaustion. Living under curse belief means interpreting every setback as evidence of something larger. You can't just have a bad day. It's the curse. You can't just make a mistake. It's the curse. Normal life becomes unbearable because nothing feels normal anymore. Everything is part of the pattern. And the more you see the pattern, the more convinced you become that escape is impossible. Breaking curse belief requires confronting the randomness of life. Bad things happen. Not because you're cursed, because life is unpredictable. But when you've spent months or years attributing every negative event to an external force, accepting that randomness feels worse, it means you've been blaming something that never existed. It means you've been afraid of nothing. And sometimes holding onto the curse feels easier than admitting you gave it power it never had. Control rituals. You can't control the weather. You know this. But before a big outdoor event, you check the forecast obsessively. You refresh the app. You look at multiple sources. You read the hourly breakdown. Not because checking changes anything, because it makes you feel like you're doing something. Control rituals are actions designed to manage anxiety about outcomes you can't influence. They don't affect the result. They affect how you feel about the result. And when the difference between helplessness and involvement feels unbearable, ritual becomes the bridge. The pattern shows up in students before exams. They rewrite notes that are already clear. They organize materials that are already organized. They reread pages they've already memorized. The studying isn't the point anymore. The ritual is. The act of preparing, even when preparation is complete, creates the illusion that they're still in control of the outcome. It intensifies around major life events. Someone waiting for medical test results starts cleaning their house obsessively. Someone interviewing for a job color codes their calendar. The ritual and the outcome have no connection, but the ritual fills the space between now and knowing. It converts waiting, which feels passive, into action, which feels productive. What makes control rituals insidious is their reasonableness. You're not being irrational. You're being thorough, prepared. Responsible. The ritual masquerades as productivity. And because it reduces anxiety temporarily, you keep doing it. The relief becomes evidence that the ritual is necessary. But the relief isn't coming from control. It's coming from distraction. The cost emerges when the ritual fails to deliver the outcome you wanted. Someone follows every per-interview ritual and doesn't get the job. Instead of recognizing that rituals don't determine results, they assume they didn't perform the ritual correctly. They add steps. They refine the process. The ritual grows until it consumes more energy than the event itself. Control rituals promise agency in situations where agency is limited. They don't provide it. They provide the sensation of it. And that sensation, however false, feels better than admitting that some outcomes simply aren't yours to control. Sports superstition. The jersey hasn't been washed in weeks. It's stiff. It smells. But the athlete won't clean it. They wore it during a winning streak. Washing it might break the streak. Logic says fabric and performance are unrelated. Superstition says don't risk it. Sports superstition thrives in high-stakes environments where skill meets randomness. You can train for years. You can execute perfectly, and still lose because of a bad bounce, a gust of wind, a ref's missed call. When outcomes feel that precarious, athletes search for anything that might tip the scales. Rituals become that something. It starts small. A player eats the same meal before every game. Another listens to the same song. Another puts their left shoe on first. These routines begin as preference. But the moment they coincide with success, they transform. The routine becomes ritual. The ritual becomes non-negotiable. Skip it, and the whole foundation feels shaky. The belief spreads through teams. One player refuses to step on the baseline. The whole team starts avoiding it. Another player taps the doorframe entering the court. Others copy it. Superstition becomes culture. And when everyone around you follows the same rituals, questioning them feels like betraying the group. What's remarkable is how intelligent, analytical athletes defend these beliefs. They'll admit there's no logical connection. But they won't abandon the ritual. Because the cost of being wrong feels too high. If the ritual doesn't work, you lose nothing by doing it. But if it does work and you skip it, you've sabotaged yourself. The asymmetry makes superstition feel rational. The problem is the dependency. Performance starts feeling conditional. The ritual isn't just helpful anymore. It's required. Forget your lucky socks, and confidence drops before the game even starts. The ritual was supposed to provide an edge. Instead, it's created a weakness. You've trained yourself to need something that does nothing. Sports superstition doesn't improve performance. It redistributes anxiety. The ritual becomes a container for fear. And as long as you have the container, the fear feels manageable. But the moment the container is gone, the fear floods back, stronger than before. Uncertainty rituals. What do you do when you can't predict the outcome? When the stakes are high and the variables are beyond your reach? Some people plan. Some people prepare. And some people create rituals that have nothing to do with the task, but everything to do with how they feel about it. Uncertainty rituals are coping mechanisms disguised as strategies. They don't increase your chances of success. They reduce the psychological discomfort of not knowing. And in moments of extreme uncertainty, that reduction feels like survival. A surgeon has a routine before every operation. They arrive early. They review the case. They check the instruments. All standard. But they also touch the same spot on the wall outside the operating room. Every time. Same spot. Same gesture. It doesn't affect the surgery. But it settles their mind. The ritual marks the transition from uncertainty to action. The same pattern appears in travelers. Someone flying across the ocean develops a pre-flight routine. They sit in the same seat if possible. They order the same drink. They read the same type of book. Flying is statistically safe. They know this. But the ritual makes the lack of control feel more bearable. It's a psychological anchor in a situation where physical anchors don't exist. Uncertainty rituals become problematic when they stop being optional. A student develops a pre-exam ritual. It works once. They repeat it. It works again. Now they can't take an exam without it. The ritual hasn't made them smarter, but they've convinced themselves it's part of their process. Remove it, and their confidence collapses. The mechanism is simple. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Anxiety demands action. When real action isn't available, ritual fills the gap. The ritual doesn't solve the problem. It just gives you something to do while the problem resolves itself. But because the problem eventually resolves, you credit the ritual. The timing was coincidence. The belief is real. Uncertainty doesn't go away because you've performed a ritual. It just becomes easier to tolerate. And if that's all you need, the ritual succeeds. But the moment you start believing the ritual is why things worked out, you've stopped managing uncertainty and started feeding superstition. Compulsive reassurance behavior. Check the door. It's locked. You saw it lock. You heard the click. But you check again anyway. Just to be sure. And then again, because being sure doesn't feel sure enough. Compulsive reassurance behavior is the need to verify something repeatedly, even after verification is complete. It's not about the information. It's about the anxiety that refuses to settle. Each check provides temporary relief. But the relief fades fast and the urge to check returns stronger. It shows up in everyday routines. Someone sends an important email. They check their sent folder. The email is there. But doubt creeps in. Did it actually send? They check again and again. The evidence is clear, but the feeling of certainty never arrives. The checking becomes a loop with no exit. The behavior intensifies under stress. Someone waiting for critical news refreshes their inbox constantly. They know a reply won't appear faster because they're checking, but checking feels like action. Inaction feels like surrender. The compulsion isn't logical. It's emotional, and emotion doesn't care about logic. What makes this behavior destructive is how it trains the brain. Each time you check and find reassurance, you reinforce the idea that checking was necessary. But you also reinforce the doubt that triggered the need to check. The cycle feeds itself. The more you check, the less you trust your initial verification. The less you trust, the more you need to check. Relationships suffer from this pattern. Someone sends a text. No response comes immediately. They check if it delivered. It did. They start wondering if the other person is upset. They check the message again, analyzing every word. They consider sending a follow-up. The compulsion to verify, to confirm, to reassure turns normal communication into a source of constant anxiety. The relief from checking is real. That's what makes the behavior so difficult to break. But the relief is temporary and the cost is cumulative. You're not building certainty. You're eroding your ability to tolerate doubt. And in a world where certainty is rare, that erosion eventually becomes unbearable. Pre-performance ritual. The hour before a presentation. The minutes before a job interview. The moments before stepping on stage. This is when pre-performance rituals take over. Not because they improve performance. Because they manage the gap between preparation and action. Athletes have them. Performers have them. But so do regular people facing high-pressure moments. The rituals vary. Some people listen to specific music. Some people wear specific clothes. Some people repeat phrases to themselves. The content doesn't matter. The consistency does. The ritual marks the boundary between normal life and performance mode. A musician always warms up the same way before a concert. Same scales. Same sequence. Same duration. It's not just practice. Practice happens earlier. This is transition. The ritual signals to the brain that it's time to shift gears. The familiarity of the routine calms nerves. The repetition creates predictability in a moment that feels unpredictable. The same logic applies to public speakers. Someone develops a pre-speech ritual. They review their notes in a specific order. They drink water at specific intervals. They pace backstage in a specific pattern. None of this changes the speech, but it changes how they feel going into it. The ritual converts chaotic energy into focused energy. Where pre-performance rituals become problematic is when they stop being helpful and start being required. A teacher has a routine before every class. It works. But one day, something disrupts the routine. They can't complete it, and suddenly they can't teach. Not because the routine was necessary, because they've convinced themselves it was. The ritual was supposed to support performance. Instead, it's become a condition for it. Skip the ritual, and confidence evaporates. The routine that was meant to reduce anxiety now creates it. You've built a dependency on something that was only ever meant to be a tool. Pre-performance rituals work best when they remain flexible, when they're a preference, not a rule. The moment they become mandatory, they've stopped serving you. You're serving them. And that inversion from tool to master is how rituals trap the people who create them. Bad luck avoidance. Some people walk around ladders. Some people refuse to say certain words out loud. Some people won't schedule important events on specific dates. They're not trying to attract good luck. They're trying to avoid bad luck. And the fear of inviting disaster feels more urgent than the hope of inviting success. Bad luck avoidance operates on a simple premise. Better safe than sorry. You don't actually believe stepping on a crack will break your mother's back. But why risk it? The cost of avoiding the crack is negligible. The imagined cost of not avoiding it, however irrational, feels too high. So you step around it. The behavior intensifies when the stakes rise. Someone preparing for a major life event starts avoiding anything associated with negative outcomes. They won't talk about the event beforehand, afraid that discussing it will jinx it. They avoid people who've had bad experiences. They steer clear of anything that could be interpreted as an omen. The avoidance isn't based on evidence. It's based on fear that evidence might be wrong. What makes bad luck avoidance insidious is its invisible cost. Walking around a ladder takes 2 extra seconds. Not saying a word takes no time at all. Each individual act of avoidance seems harmless. But the cumulative effect is a life increasingly shaped by superstition. You're not just avoiding ladders. You're avoiding entire categories of thought and action because they feel unsafe. It also creates a confirmation bias loop. You avoid something. Nothing bad happens. You credit the avoidance. But you never test the counterfactual. You never walk under the ladder to see if disaster actually follows. The belief survives because you've structured your behavior to never challenge it. Socially, bad luck avoidance spreads through shared anxiety. Someone mentions they're worried about a specific outcome. Another person suggests avoiding certain actions to prevent it. The suggestion isn't rooted in logic, but it's rooted in care. And when someone you trust recommends avoidance, it feels safer to comply than to dismiss. Bad luck avoidance doesn't protect you. It restricts you. Every avoided action, every unspoken word, every rearranged plan is a concession to a belief that has no basis in reality. And the more you concede, the more power the belief gains, until you're navigating life around invisible rules that you created and now can't escape. Symbolic protection behavior. A small charm hangs from a rearview mirror. A bracelet never comes off. A worn photo stays tucked in a wallet. These objects have no special properties. They're just things. But the person carrying them believes otherwise. They're not accessories. They're shields, Symbolic protection behavior is the practice of using objects or symbols as psychological armor against harm. The logic doesn't hold up. A piece of metal can't ward off danger. But the feeling of being protected, however irrational, changes how someone moves through the world. And that change feels real enough to justify the belief. The objects vary by culture and personal history. Some people carry religious symbols. Others keep tokens from meaningful moments. A coin from a grandparent. A stone from a significant place. The object itself doesn't matter. What matters is the meaning assigned to it. That meaning transforms an ordinary item into something powerful, at least in the mind of the person carrying it. The behavior intensifies during times of vulnerability. Someone facing surgery keeps a specific item close. A traveler packs a particular memento before every trip. The object becomes a lifeline, something tangible to hold onto when everything else feels uncertain. It doesn't provide actual protection, but it provides comfort. And in moments of fear, comfort and protection can feel like the same thing. What makes this behavior sticky is how deeply personal it becomes. The object isn't just a symbol. It's tied to identity. Losing it feels like losing part of yourself. Not because the object has intrinsic value, because you've invested it with emotional significance that now feels inseparable from your safety. The cost emerges when the object is lost or damaged. Someone misplaces their protective charm. Panic sets in. Not because they're now in danger, because they believe they are. The protection was never real, but the belief in it was. And without the object, that belief has nowhere to anchor. The person feels exposed, vulnerable, defenseless, all because an ordinary item is no longer within reach. Symbolic protection behavior doesn't guard against harm. It guards against the feeling of helplessness. And as long as the object is present, that's enough. But the moment it's gone, the illusion shatters, and the helplessness rushes back, more intense than before. Fortune-seeking ritual. Avoiding bad luck is one thing. Chasing good luck is another. Bad luck avoidance is defensive. You sidestep what might harm you. Fortune-seeking is offensive. You actively pursue actions you believe will tilt outcomes in your favor. The rituals range from small to elaborate. Someone finds a penny heads up on the sidewalk. They pick it up, convinced it's a sign of coming fortune. Another person throws coins into a fountain, making a wish with each toss. The fountain doesn't grant wishes, but the act of throwing feels like participation in something larger. It converts hope into action. Gambling culture thrives on fortune-seeking rituals. A player blows on dice before rolling. Another taps the table 3 times before placing a bet. These actions have no impact on probability, but they provide the illusion of influence. And in games where outcomes are random, that illusion feels better than accepting pure chance. The same logic appears in job searches. Someone wears a specific outfit to interviews, convinced it brings good results. Another follows a morning routine they believe attracts opportunities. The routine and the outcome are unrelated, but the ritual makes waiting for results feel less passive. You're not just hoping for good luck, you're doing something to invite it. What separates fortune-seeking from simple optimism is the belief in causation. Optimism says good things might happen. Fortune-seeking says good things will happen if you perform the right actions. It's the difference between hoping for success and believing you can conjure it through ritual. The danger is wasted effort. Time spent on rituals is time not spent on preparation. Someone focused on carrying the right lucky object might neglect the actual work required for success. The ritual becomes a substitute for action. And when success doesn't come, they don't question the ritual. They assume they performed it incorrectly. Fortune-seeking rituals promise control over randomness. They don't deliver, but they make randomness feel more tolerable. And for people who can't accept that outcomes are often beyond their influence, that tolerance is worth the delusion. Taboo avoidance. There are words you don't say, topics you don't mention, actions you don't take not because they're harmful, but because they feel forbidden. Not by law, not by rule, by superstition. And the fear of violating that invisible boundary feels as real as any written restriction. Taboo avoidance is the practice of steering clear of specific behaviors or subjects because of an irrational belief that engaging with them invites misfortune. The taboos vary by culture, but the underlying psychology is consistent. Certain things are off limits, not because of evidence, because of tradition, fear, or collective agreement that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. In some cultures, mentioning death directly is avoided. Euphemisms replace the word, not because the word itself causes harm, because saying it feels like inviting it closer. The belief is that language has power, that naming something makes it more likely to occur. So, people speak around it using indirect phrasing to keep the concept at a distance. The same pattern appears in everyday superstition. Someone won't talk about an upcoming event they're excited about, afraid that discussing it will jinx it. Another person refuses to celebrate early, convinced that premature acknowledgement will ruin the outcome. The logic doesn't connect. But the fear of breaking the taboo overrides logic. Taboo avoidance also operates socially. Groups develop unspoken rules about what can and can't be discussed. Violating those rules doesn't just break superstition. It breaks trust. The person who mentions the forbidden topic becomes the one who invited bad luck. And even if nothing bad happens, the group remembers. The taboo is reinforced through social pressure, not evidence. What makes taboo avoidance powerful is its invisibility. You can't see the rule. You can't test it. You just know through cultural transmission or personal anxiety that some things shouldn't be done. And because the rule is invisible, it's also unbreakable. There's no way to prove it wrong without risking the consequences you believe will follow. Taboo avoidance doesn't protect you from harm. It protects you from the anxiety of imagining harm. And as long as you follow the rules, that anxiety stays dormant. But the rules never fade. They accumulate. And over time, your world shrinks, shaped by fears that were never real to begin with. Ritual dependency. Watch what happens when a ritual is interrupted. Not disrupted intentionally, just broken by circumstance. A flight delay, a forgotten item, a change in routine. The person relying on the ritual doesn't adapt. They panic. Ritual dependency is the state of needing a specific sequence of actions to feel capable of proceeding. The ritual started as optional, a preference, something that helped. But over time, it became mandatory. Now, without it, the person feels unable to function. The dependency isn't physical. It's psychological, but that doesn't make it less powerful. Athletes fall into this trap. A pre-game ritual that once calmed nerves becomes a prerequisite for performance. Miss a step, and confidence evaporates. The athlete isn't less skilled without the ritual. But they believe they are, and belief shapes performance. The ritual hasn't made them better. It's made them fragile. The pattern extends beyond sports. A writer develops a specific routine before working. Same time, same place, same setup. It works for a while. But then something changes. The usual space isn't available. The routine breaks. And suddenly, writing feels impossible. Not because the ability is gone. Because the ritual that triggered the ability isn't there. Ritual dependency creates a false bottleneck. You convince yourself that success requires a specific condition. That condition becomes the gatekeeper. Without it, you don't even try. The ritual was supposed to support you. Instead, it's become a barrier. You've handed your agency to a sequence of actions that never had power to begin with. Breaking the dependency requires exposure. You have to perform without the ritual and see that you're still capable. But that exposure feels like a risk. What if you fail? The ritual can't take the blame if it wasn't there. So you avoid the test. You protect the ritual, and in doing so, you protect the dependency. The cost of ritual dependency is adaptability. Life doesn't always allow for perfect conditions. Routines get disrupted. Items get lost. Schedules change. If your ability to function depends on everything aligning perfectly, you've set yourself up for constant anxiety. The world won't conform to your ritual, and the more rigid the ritual, the more fragile you become. Lucky number belief. Why does a number feel lucky? It's arbitrary. 7, 3, 8. They're just symbols representing quantity. They don't carry inherent fortune. But tell that to someone who's convinced their lucky number has shaped their life. They won't believe you. Because in their experience, the number has worked. Lucky number belief is the conviction that specific numbers attract positive outcomes. The belief forms through association. Something good happened on the 7th. You got a promotion in apartment 3. You won a raffle with ticket number 8. The number and the event weren't connected, but your brain linked them. And once linked, the number becomes significant. The belief persists through selective memory. You remember when your lucky number appeared and something good followed. You forget the dozens of times it appeared and nothing happened. Or the times good things happened without it. The pattern you see isn't real, but because you're filtering for confirmation, it feels real. People build entire practices around lucky numbers. They choose addresses, phone numbers, and license plates based on numerical preference. They play the lottery with the same combination every time, convinced that persistence will eventually pay off. The odds don't change. But the ritual of choosing the lucky number makes the randomness feel less random. In some cultures, lucky numbers are collectively agreed upon. 8 is fortunate in Chinese culture because it sounds like the word for prosperity. 7 is lucky in Western culture for reasons rooted in religion and history. The numbers don't have magical properties, but shared belief gives them social power. Businesses price items to end in lucky numbers. Buildings skip unlucky floors and go straight to lucky ones. What makes lucky number belief compelling is how low cost it feels. Preferring one number over another seems harmless. It doesn't require much effort. It doesn't interfere with daily life, so people indulge it. They choose the lucky number when given the option, and every time something good happens afterward, the belief strengthens. But the belief isn't harmless. It's a gateway. Once you accept that a number can influence outcomes, you've opened the door to magical thinking. You've decided that arbitrary symbols have power over reality. And that decision, however small it seems, shapes how you interpret cause and effect in every area of life. A lucky number avoidance. The elevator goes from 12 to 14. There's no 13th floor. Not because it doesn't exist. It does. It's just labeled 14. The building hasn't removed the floor. It's removed the number. Because enough people refuse to live, work, or stay on the 13th floor that renaming it became easier than explaining that superstition isn't real. Unlucky number avoidance is the practice of steering clear of specific numbers believed to carry misfortune. 13 is the most common in Western culture. 4 in East Asian cultures, where it sounds like the word for death. The numbers themselves are neutral, but cultural belief has turned them into symbols of bad luck. And once a society agrees on that symbolism, the numbers become functionally unlucky, not because they cause harm, but because people treat them as if they do. The avoidance spreads through infrastructure. Airlines skip row 13. Hospitals avoid room numbers with 4. Buildings renumber floors to sidestep the unlucky digit. These aren't isolated decisions. They're responses to collective superstition. Enough people believe, or enough people worry that others believe, that avoiding the number becomes standard practice. What's remarkable is how seriously the avoidance is taken. Someone offered a significant discount on an apartment because its number 13 hesitates. The discount is real. The bad luck isn't, but the association is so strong that the financial benefit doesn't override the psychological cost. They'd rather pay more for a different number than risk living under one they've been taught to fear. The belief also affects major life decisions. Couples avoid scheduling weddings on the 13th. Businesses delay product launches. Travelers rearrange plans. The number has no actual impact on these events, but the fear of it does. The superstition becomes self-perpetuating. Avoid the number and nothing bad happens. You credit the avoidance. Engage with the number, and if anything goes wrong, you blame the number. Either way, the belief survives. Unlucky number avoidance is unique because it's often inherited, not experienced. You don't develop the fear from personal trauma with the number. You absorb it from culture. Parents, media, collective storytelling all reinforce the idea that certain numbers are dangerous. And because the belief is cultural, it feels like fact. It's not your personal superstition. It's shared knowledge. And shared knowledge is harder to question. The cost of this avoidance is subtle but real. Every avoided number is a concession to irrationality. Every renumbered floor, every skipped row, every rescheduled event is evidence that superstition has shaped the physical world. And the more the world accommodates the belief, the more legitimate it appears, trapping future generations in the same irrational pattern. Personal jinx theory. You've convinced yourself you're cursed in a specific way, not broadly. Not about everything, just one particular thing. Job interviews always go badly. Relationships always fall apart at the same stage. Every time you plan a trip, something disrupts it. The pattern feels too consistent to be coincidence. So you've developed a theory you're jinxed. Personal jinx theory is the belief that you specifically are subject to recurring bad luck in a particular area. It's not general pessimism. It's targeted. You might be optimistic about most things, but in this one domain, you've accepted that outcomes will always turn against you. And that acceptance shapes everything. The theory forms through selective pattern recognition. You remember the failed interviews. You forget the ones that went fine but didn't result in offers for unrelated reasons. You remember the relationships that ended. You forget the ones that simply weren't right. Your mind filters for evidence of the jinx and discards anything that contradicts it. What makes personal jinx theory destructive is how it becomes self-fulfilling. If you believe you're jinxed in job interviews, you enter every interview expecting failure. That expectation creates anxiety. Anxiety affects performance. Performance affects outcomes. The jinx you believed in becomes real, not because it existed, but because your belief in it changed your behavior. The theory also provides psychological relief. If you're jinxed, failures aren't your fault. They're inevitable. You don't have to examine what you might be doing wrong. You don't have to change your approach. The jinx absolves you of responsibility. And that absolution, however false, feels easier than accepting that outcomes are often within your control. Breaking a personal jinx theory requires testing it. You have to approach the situation differently and see if outcomes change. But that test feels risky. What if you try and still fail? Then you've lost the comfort of the jinx. You can't blame bad luck anymore. You have to confront the possibility that something else is wrong, so most people don't test. They protect the theory, and in doing so, they guarantee its continuation. Repetitive safety rituals. Count to 3 before turning off the light. Check the stove 5 times before leaving. Repeat a phrase in your head until it feels right. These aren't one-time actions. They're loops. And the loops don't stop until something inside you signals that it's safe to move on. Repetitive safety rituals are actions performed multiple times to reduce anxiety about potential harm. The first check didn't work. The feeling of safety didn't arrive. So you check again. And again. Each repetition provides brief relief. But the relief fades almost immediately. pulling you back into the loop. The behavior starts reasonably. Checking that the door is locked makes sense. Verifying the stove is off is responsible. But somewhere, the reasonable check becomes compulsive repetition. You're no longer verifying. You're trying to satisfy an internal demand for certainty that can never be met. The rituals intensify under stress. Someone going through a difficult period starts checking things more often. The checks become longer, more detailed, more frequent. The ritual expands to fill the anxiety it's supposed to relieve. But it doesn't relieve it. It temporarily distracts from it. And the moment the distraction ends, the anxiety returns, stronger than before. What traps people in repetitive safety rituals is the fear of what happens if they stop. If you check the stove 5 times and everything is fine, stopping at 4 feels dangerous. What if the 5th check was the one that mattered? The logic doesn't hold, but the fear does. And fear doesn't negotiate with logic. The cost is time and mental energy. Every ritual cycle takes minutes. Multiple cycles take hours. The energy spent managing anxiety through repetition is energy unavailable for anything else. And the more you repeat, the more the brain learns that repetition is necessary. You're not building safety. You're training yourself to doubt your initial verification. Repetitive safety rituals promise control over harm. They don't deliver control. They deliver temporary relief from the fear of harm. And that relief becomes addictive, pulling you deeper into loops that solve nothing but become impossible to escape. Object-linked confidence. There's a watch you wear to important meetings. Nothing special about it. Standard design. Average price. But you feel different when it's on your wrist. More capable. More focused. You've convinced yourself that wearing it improves performance. And now, facing a high-stakes situation without it feels like going in unarmed. Object-linked confidence is the phenomenon where self-assurance becomes dependent on possessing or using a specific item. The object doesn't grant ability, but it triggers a mental state associated with competence. And over time, you stop being able to access that state without the object present. The link forms through association. You wore the watch during a successful presentation. Your brain connected the object to the outcome. Next time you wore it again. Another success. The pattern reinforced. Eventually, the watch stopped being an accessory. It became part of your process. A psychological anchor that signals readiness. Athletes experience this intensely. A particular pair of shoes. A specific headband. A piece of equipment they've used for years. These items aren't functionally superior, but they feel essential. The athlete has bound their confidence to the object. Without it, they feel off balance. Not because the object provided an advantage, because they've conditioned themselves to believe it does. What makes object-linked confidence problematic is the dependency it creates. Lose the object, and confidence collapses. Not because you've lost ability, because you've lost the trigger you've trained yourself to need. The object was supposed to support you. Instead, it's become a crutch. You've outsourced your sense of capability to something external. The trap is circular. Use the object and succeed, and you credit the object. Fail while using it, and you assume you didn't use it correctly. Either way, the belief in the object's power survives. You never test whether you can perform without it, because testing feels too risky. What if you can't? Better to keep the object and never find out. Object-linked confidence isn't about the object. It's about control. The object represents a variable you can manage. Wear the watch, and you've done something. It doesn't matter that the something is meaningless. It matters that it feels like action. And when so much of performance is beyond your direct control, having one thing you can control, even if it's symbolic, feels necessary. Prevention by Symbolic Act. Can you prevent disaster with a gesture? Knock on wood. Toss salt over your shoulder. Cross your fingers. These actions don't change outcomes, but they feel like protection. And in moments of uncertainty, the feeling of protection is enough to make the action seem necessary. Prevention by Symbolic Act is the belief that performing a specific gesture or ritual can ward off bad luck or negative outcomes. The act and the outcome have no causal relationship, but the mind links them. You knock on wood after saying something hopeful. Nothing bad happens. You credit the knock. The belief forms. The rituals are culturally inherited. You don't invent them. You absorb them. Someone taught you to knock on wood. Someone else told you not to walk under ladders. These aren't personal discoveries. They're transmitted behaviors, passed down through generations who never questioned whether they worked. And because everyone around you does them, they feel legitimate. What's remarkable is how automatic they become. You don't consciously decide to knock on wood. You just do it. The moment you express hope or confidence, your hand moves. The ritual has bypassed deliberate thought. It's reflex now, and reflexes are harder to break than conscious choices. The prevention is always invisible. You knock on wood. Nothing bad happens. But nothing bad was going to happen anyway. You can't see the disaster you supposedly prevented, because it never existed. The ritual takes credit for maintaining the status quo. And because the status quo is what you wanted, the ritual appears successful. The cost is subtle. Each symbolic act reinforces the idea that you're vulnerable without it. You start to feel exposed when you can't perform the ritual. Someone says something optimistic, and you reach for wood. There's no wood nearby. Anxiety spikes. Not because danger increased. Because you couldn't complete the protective gesture you've trained yourself to need. Prevention by Symbolic Act doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you dependent. Dependent on rituals that do nothing but feel necessary. And the more you perform them, the more necessary they feel, until you can't imagine navigating uncertainty without a gesture that was never protecting you to begin with. Performance anxiety ritualization. Anxiety before performance is normal. Everyone feels it. But some people don't just feel it. They ritualize it. They create elaborate routines designed to manage the anxiety. And over time, the routine becomes as important as the performance itself. Performance anxiety ritualization is the process of converting nervousness into structured behavior. The anxiety doesn't go away. It gets channeled into specific actions. A sequence that must be followed exactly. The ritual doesn't eliminate the anxiety. It contains it. And containment feels like control. A musician develops a pre-concert routine. They warm up in a specific order. They visualize the performance in a specific way. They breathe using a specific pattern. Each element is designed to calm nerves. And it works, initially. The ritual focuses scattered energy. But then the ritual becomes mandatory. Skip a step, and panic sets in. The routine that was supposed to help now controls you. The same pattern appears in public speaking. Someone creates a pre-speech ritual. Review notes. Drink water. Pace backstage. Each action reduces anxiety slightly, but the reduction is temporary. And because it's temporary, they add more steps. The ritual grows. What started as a few calming actions becomes a complex sequence that takes longer than the speech itself. What makes performance anxiety ritualization insidious is how it disguises dependency as preparation. You're not being superstitious. You're being thorough. Professional. The ritual looks like good practice. But underneath, it's fear management. And fear management isn't the same as fear reduction. You're not less anxious. You're just busy. The ritual also creates a new source of anxiety. You're not just worried about the performance. You're worried about completing the ritual correctly. Miss a step, and now you have two problems. The original performance anxiety and the anxiety about not being properly prepared. The ritual was supposed to reduce stress. Instead, it's doubled it. Performance anxiety ritualization works until it doesn't. until the day the ritual is disrupted. A flight delay, a forgotten item, a change in circumstances, and suddenly you're facing the performance without the safety net you've built. That's when you discover the ritual wasn't reducing anxiety. It was postponing the confrontation with it. And now, without the ritual, the anxiety you've been avoiding crashes down all at once. Habit ritual confusion. You think it's just a routine. Morning coffee. Same mug. Same time. Nothing unusual about that. Everyone has habits. But somewhere along the way, your habit stopped being about preference. It became about necessity. And you didn't notice the shift. Habit ritual confusion is the failure to recognize when a practical routine has transformed into a superstitious requirement. Habits are flexible. You do them because they're convenient or enjoyable. Rituals are rigid. You do them because not doing them feels dangerous. The actions look identical. The psychology behind them is completely different. The transition happens gradually. You start a routine for practical reasons. It works. It becomes comfortable. You keep doing it, then one day you can't do it. The usual coffee isn't available. The mug is dirty. And instead of adapting, you panic. That's when you realize the routine wasn't just a habit. It was a ritual. And rituals don't tolerate disruption. What makes this confusion dangerous is how it hides in plain sight. Routines are everywhere. Most are harmless. But some have crossed into ritual territory without you realizing. The difference reveals itself only when the routine breaks. If you adapt easily, it was a habit. If you feel unable to proceed, it was a ritual all along. The confusion also prevents recognition of the problem. When someone points out your rigidity, you defend it as consistency. You're not being superstitious. You're being organized. But organization allows for flexibility. Superstition doesn't. If missing your routine feels like inviting disaster, you're not maintaining a habit. You're serving a ritual. Breaking the confusion requires testing. You have to deliberately disrupt the routine and observe your reaction. Can you function without it? Does the day proceed normally? Or does the absence create disproportionate distress? The test is simple, but most people avoid it, because deep down, they already know the answer. And confronting it means admitting the routine stopped being helpful and started being controlling. Habit ritual confusion is subtle. You can live with it for years without recognizing it. But it's also progressive. The more routines that cross into ritual, the more rigid your life becomes. And rigidity, disguised as consistency, slowly turns freedom into dependency without you ever noticing the change. Fate appeasement behavior. A small offering left at a shrine. A coin tossed into water. A quiet promise made to no one in particular. These aren't grand gestures. They're tiny acts of negotiation with forces that may not exist. But the person performing them feels better afterward. As if they've done something to keep fate on their side. Fate appeasement behavior is the practice of performing symbolic actions to placate perceived higher powers or cosmic forces. The logic is transactional. Give something small now to avoid losing something large later. The offering doesn't have to make sense. It just has to feel like acknowledgement. Like you've paid your respects to whatever controls outcomes. The behavior appears across cultures. Burning incense before a journey. Leaving food for spirits. Whispering thanks after narrowly avoiding harm. These actions don't change what will happen. But they change how the person feels about what might happen. They've taken precautions. Not practical ones. Symbolic ones. And symbolic precautions feel better than no precautions at all. What makes fate appeasement compelling is how low cost it seems. A coin. A candle. A moment of silence. You're not sacrificing much. And if it does nothing, you've lost almost nothing. But if it works, if fate really does notice and respond, you've protected yourself. The asymmetry makes the behavior feel rational, even when the belief behind it isn't. The pattern intensifies before uncertain events. Someone facing surgery leaves an offering. Another makes a promise to change if things go well. The offering and the outcome are unrelated. But the act of offering creates a sense of agency. You're not passively waiting. You're participating. And participation, even symbolic participation, feels like power. Where fate appeasement becomes problematic is when it replaces action. Someone facing a challenge makes an offering instead of preparing. The offering feels like enough. They've done their part. Now fate will handle the rest. But fate doesn't handle anything, and the time spent appeasing imaginary forces is time not spent addressing real problems. Fate appeasement doesn't influence outcomes. It influences feelings about outcomes. And sometimes that's all people need. A ritual that makes uncertainty tolerable. A gesture that converts helplessness into contribution. The forces being appeased don't exist. But the comfort derived from appeasing them does. And comfort, however unfounded, can feel worth the cost. Purification ritual urge. Why does starting fresh feel like washing away bad luck? A new haircut after a breakup. Cleaning the entire house after a difficult period. Throwing out old belongings and replacing them with new. These actions don't erase what happened. But they feel like they do. Like you're wiping the slate clean and giving fortune a chance to reset. Purification ritual urge is the compulsion to perform cleansing actions after negative experiences, believing they can remove lingering bad energy or misfortune. The rituals vary. Physical cleaning. Symbolic burning. Donating items. What they share is the belief that the past can be washed away through deliberate acts of removal. The psychology is rooted in control. When something bad happens, you can't undo it. But you can do something that feels like undoing it. You can clear space. Remove traces. Start over. The ritual doesn't change history. But it changes your environment. And a changed environment can trigger a changed mindset. The purification is psychological, not mystical. But the belief in its power makes it feel mystical. Athletes practice this after losses. They change routines, adjust equipment, alter superstitions. Not because the old approach caused the loss, because keeping it feels like carrying the loss forward. The purification ritual creates distance between past failure and future attempts. It's a mental reset disguised as practical action. The same pattern appears after relationships end. Someone clears their space of reminders, rearranges furniture, changes their appearance. They're not just moving on. They're performing moving on. The ritual signals to themselves and others that a chapter is closed. And the act of signaling can make the closure feel more real. Where purification rituals become destructive is when they're used to avoid processing. Instead of confronting what went wrong, you cleanse it away. The ritual provides temporary relief. But it doesn't provide resolution. The discomfort you're washing away returns because you never actually dealt with its source. You just performed a gesture that felt like dealing with it. Purification rituals work when they mark genuine change. When the cleaning is accompanied by reflection. When the fresh start is built on lessons learned, not just objects discarded. But when the ritual replaces the work, when it becomes a substitute for growth, you're not purifying, you're repeating. And repetition, no matter how clean it looks, doesn't create progress. Threshold rituals. Watch someone stepping through a doorway into an important space. They might pause, touch the frame, whisper something under their breath. The threshold isn't just a physical boundary, it's a psychological one. And crossing it without acknowledgement feels like entering unprepared. Threshold rituals are symbolic actions performed when transitioning between spaces or states. The doorway, the start of a journey, the beginning of a new phase. These moments feel significant, and significance demands recognition. The ritual marks the crossing, It signals that you're aware of the shift and prepared for what comes next. The behavior is ancient. Brides carried over thresholds. Travelers blessed before departing. Soldiers performed rites before battle. The rituals weren't practical. They were psychological, a way to manage the anxiety of transition by giving it structure. The act of acknowledging the threshold made crossing it feel intentional rather than accidental. In modern life, threshold rituals persist in smaller forms. An athlete taps the doorframe entering the field. A student takes a deep breath before an exam room. A professional adjusts their posture before a meeting. These aren't elaborate ceremonies. They're micro-rituals. But they serve the same function. They mark the moment of transition and prepare the mind for what follows. What makes threshold rituals powerful is their timing. They occur at natural breaks, moments where you're already pausing. The ritual doesn't interrupt flow. It enhances it. It takes a moment that's already happening and gives it meaning. And meaning, even manufactured meaning, can improve focus. The danger is dependency. When the threshold ritual becomes mandatory, when you can't cross without it, the support has become a limitation. You've trained yourself to need a specific action before proceeding. Miss it, and confidence falters. The ritual that was supposed to help you transition has become a barrier to transition. Threshold rituals are useful when they're flexible, when they mark transitions without controlling them. But when crossing a doorway requires a specific gesture every time, you're no longer managing transitions. You're being managed by them. Weather and event omen linking. Rain on your wedding day. A sunny funeral. A storm during an important meeting. The weather and the event have no connection. One is meteorology. The other is scheduling. But people link them anyway. They read meaning into coincidence. And once meaning is assigned, the weather stops being random and starts feeling like a sign. Weather and event omen linking is the practice of interpreting atmospheric conditions as indicators of how an event will unfold or what it means. Good weather equals good fortune. Bad weather equals bad luck. The interpretation is cultural and arbitrary. But once it's embedded, it shapes how people experience the event itself. The belief persists because weather is visible and immediate. It's the first thing people notice when they arrive. If it's raining, that becomes the opening observation. An opening observation set tone. A rainy wedding gets framed as inauspicious before it even starts. Not because rain affects the marriage, because the cultural script says rain on weddings is unlucky. But the script varies. In some cultures, rain is considered good luck. It represents fertility, cleansing, or blessings. The weather is the same. The interpretation is opposite, which proves the link isn't real. It's assigned. And what's assigned can be reassigned, but most people don't reassign. They accept the interpretation they were taught and let it color their experience. What makes weather omen linking insidious is how it affects memory. A wedding on a sunny day gets remembered as perfect. A wedding on a rainy day gets remembered as flawed, even if everything else was identical. The weather becomes the lens through which the entire event is recalled. And that lens distorts. It emphasizes what was out of anyone's control and minimizes what actually mattered. The linking also creates self-fulfilling prophecies. Bad weather is interpreted as a bad omen. People enter the event with lowered expectations. They notice problems more. They remember difficulties more vividly. The event isn't objectively worse, but their experience of it is. The omen shaped perception, and perception shaped reality. Weather doesn't send messages. It follows patterns, pressure systems, temperature gradients, wind currents. None of these care about your event. But if you believe they do, you'll read intent into randomness. And once you start reading intent, every storm feels personal and every clear sky feels like approval. Avoidance of jinxing success. You're close to something you want. A promotion, a relationship milestone, a goal you've been working toward, and someone asks how it's going, you could tell them. You could express optimism. But instead you downplay. You hedge. You avoid saying it's going well, because talking about success before it's secured feels like inviting failure. Avoidance of jinxing success is the belief that expressing confidence or discussing positive outcomes prematurely will cause those outcomes to fail. The logic is magical. Words of power. Speaking success makes it less likely. Staying quiet protects it. So you don't celebrate early. You don't share progress. You keep hope private until it's confirmed. The pattern shows up everywhere. Athletes refuse to discuss winning streaks. Students won't talk about exams they feel good about. People in new relationships avoid labels. Not because they're not optimistic. Because they believe optimism, when voiced, becomes a curse. The safer move is silence. Let the outcome arrive unannounced. What drives this belief is loss aversion. The fear of losing something feels stronger than the desire to gain it. If you talk about success and it doesn't happen, you look foolish. You've publicly invested in an outcome that didn't materialize. But if you stay quiet and it fails, only you know. The embarrassment is private. So you protect yourself by not committing verbally. The avoidance also reflects superstition about cosmic balance. If you claim success too early, the universe will notice and correct. You've gotten ahead of yourself. You've tempted fate. And fate, in this belief system, punishes presumption. Better to stay humble. Better to let success speak itself than to speak for it and risk retribution. Where this becomes destructive is in how it limits celebration and connection. Sharing progress isn't just bragging. It's how people build support. It's how relationships deepen. When you refuse to talk about what's going well, you isolate yourself from encouragement. You're protecting against a jinx that doesn't exist by creating a real-cost disconnection from the people who care. Avoidance of jinxing success doesn't protect outcomes. It protects ego. You're not preventing failure. You're preventing the public acknowledgement of hope. And hope, when kept silent, doesn't grow. It shrinks. The jinx you're avoiding isn't external. It's internal. The belief that speaking joy will destroy it is, itself, the thing destroying it. Knock-on-wood psychology. You just said something hopeful. Something about the future. Something good you expect to happen. And immediately your hand reeks for wood. You knock 3 times. Maybe more. You don't think about it. It's automatic. A reflex triggered by the act of expressing optimism. Knock-on-wood psychology is the compulsion to perform a protective gesture after stating something positive or tempting fate through words. The belief is that speaking good fortune out loud attracts bad luck unless you immediately neutralize it. Knocking on wood is the neutralizer, a physical act that supposedly cancels the risk you just created by talking. The ritual is culturally embedded. Children learn it before they understand why. They see adults do it. They copy. And over time, the copying becomes habit. The habit becomes belief. By adulthood, most people can't explain why knocking on wood works. They just know it feels necessary. The ritual has outlived its origin story and survives on pure cultural transmission. What's remarkable is the immediacy of the compulsion. You don't finish the sentence and then decide whether to knock. Your hand is already moving. The gesture happens in the same breath as the words. It's become part of the speech pattern itself. Optimism and protection fused into one automatic sequence. The psychology reveals deep-seated anxiety about fortune. Good things feel fragile. Mentioning them feels dangerous. Like you're drawing attention to something that should stay hidden. The knock is an apology. A way of telling fate or luck, or whatever force governs outcomes, that you didn't mean to presume. You're staying humble. You're acknowledging that nothing is guaranteed. But the ritual also reinforces the anxiety it's meant to relieve. Every time you knock, You're confirming the belief that speaking positively is risky. You're training yourself to associate hope with danger. Over time, the protective gesture becomes a source of stress. You can't express optimism without immediately performing damage control. Knock-on-wood psychology doesn't prevent bad outcomes. It prevents full expression of hope. You're allowed to be optimistic, but only if you immediately undercut it with a ritual that signals you don't really mean it. The gesture says, "I'm not really claiming this. I'm not really confident. I'm just hoping, and I know hoping is dangerous." And that message, repeated enough times, becomes internalized. You stop hoping freely. You start hoping defensively. And defensive hope isn't hope at all. Wish protection rituals. Make a wish on a falling star. Blow out birthday candles and keep the wish silent. Find a penny heads up and pocket it for luck. The wish itself is private, but protecting it requires action. And the action follows rules you've absorbed without questioning. Don't tell anyone. Don't speak it out loud. Guard it like a secret that, if exposed, will lose its power. Wish protection rituals are behaviors performed to preserve the perceived potency of a wish or hope. The belief is that wishes are fragile. Talking about them breaks the spell. Sharing them dilutes their strength. So you keep them hidden. You perform small rituals to shield them from forces that might interfere. The wish remains intact only as long as the protection holds. The rules are culturally specific but universally strict. In some traditions, you blow out candles in one breath or the wish won't come true. In others, you close your eyes while wishing to keep it pure. The specifics differ. The underlying psychology doesn't. Wishes need safeguarding, and safeguarding requires compliance with ritual. What makes wish protection compelling is how it converts hope into responsibility. You're not just hoping for something. You're actively maintaining the conditions for it to happen. The ritual gives you a role. It makes you feel involved in the outcome, even when the outcome has nothing to do with whether you stayed silent or closed your eyes. The pattern intensifies with important wishes. Someone makes a wish about a major life goal. They don't just keep it private. They avoid thinking about it too directly. They create mental distance, afraid that too much focus will somehow jinx it. The wish becomes something they protect from themselves. And that protection, meant to preserve hope, often smothers it instead. Where wish protection becomes destructive is when it replaces action. Someone wishes for a better job but won't talk about their goals because talking feels like jinxing. They protect the wish so carefully that they never develop a plan. The ritual convinces them they're doing something, but they're not. They're guarding a hope they never act on. And hopes without action don't come true, no matter how well protected. Wish protection rituals don't make wishes more likely to happen. They make wishes feel more precious. And precious things require careful handling. But the handling becomes the point. The ritual replaces pursuit. And what you protect indefinitely, you never actually claim. Ritual after near miss. You almost got hurt. A car swerved. A branch fell. Something went wrong, but not completely. You're fine. But you don't feel fine. You feel like you've used up luck. Like you've narrowly escaped something, and now you need to reset. So you perform a ritual. Not because it makes sense. Because it feels necessary. Ritual after near miss is the compulsion to engage in superstitious behavior following a close call, as if the event has depleted your safety reserves and the ritual can restore them. The logic is transactional. You almost lost something. You need to balance the scales. The ritual is how you pay the debt or acknowledge the warning or reset your status to safe. The rituals vary. Some people knock on wood. Others say a prayer. Some perform a cleansing act, like washing their hands or changing clothes. The specific action doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling that you can't proceed as if nothing happened. The near miss marked you, and the mark needs to be addressed. Athletes experience this intensely. A close game, a near injury, an almost fumble. Even though nothing bad actually happened, the near miss triggers heightened ritual. They add steps to their pre-game routine. They intensify existing superstitions. The near miss didn't cause harm, but it made them feel vulnerable. And vulnerability demands protection. What makes this pattern insidious is how it reinforces superstition through randomness. Near misses happen. They're part of life, but each one becomes evidence that you need more protection, more rituals, stronger routines. The rituals don't prevent near misses, but because near misses are random, you can never prove the rituals aren't working, so they multiply. The behavior also creates a false sense of control. You can't prevent accidents, but you can perform rituals afterward, and performing them makes you feel like you've done something to prevent the next one. The ritual converts helplessness into action. It doesn't reduce risk, but it reduces the feeling of risk, and feeling safer, even when you're not, can be enough to keep the ritual alive. Ritual after near miss doesn't reset your luck. It resets your anxiety, and that reset, temporary as it is, feels valuable. But the cost is dependency. Each near miss now requires ritual, and life is full of near misses. So the rituals never stop. They just accumulate, building a framework of superstition around events that were always going to be random. Socially shared superstition. Everyone in the office does it. Before a big presentation, they follow the same routine. Touch the doorframe. Avoid certain phrases. Wear specific colors. It started with one person. Then others copied. Now it's culture. And questioning it feels like betraying the group. Socially shared superstition is the phenomenon where superstitious beliefs and rituals become embedded in group behavior, reinforced not through evidence but through collective participation. The belief survives because everyone performs it. And everyone performs it because everyone else does. The ritual becomes identity. And identity doesn't require proof. The spread happens through observation and imitation. A team member performs a ritual before a successful event. Others notice. They copy it next time. Success happens again. The ritual gets credited. Soon, the entire group is doing it. No one questions whether it works. They just know it's what the group does. And doing what the group does feels safer than standing out. What makes socially shared superstition powerful is social pressure. Individual superstitions are private. You can abandon them without anyone knowing. But group superstitions are public. Skipping the ritual means explaining why. It means defending your choice not to participate. And that defense, however rational, makes you the outlier. Most people would rather perform a meaningless ritual than become the person who broke with tradition. The rituals also create cohesion. Shared superstitions aren't just about luck. They're about belonging. When everyone touches the same spot before entering a room, it's not just ritual. It's membership. You're part of something. And that belonging, especially in uncertain environments, feels valuable. The ritual is the price of admission. Where socially shared superstition becomes problematic is when it stifles dissent. Someone recognizes the ritual is pointless. But they can't say so. The group has invested in the belief. Challenging it means challenging the group. So they stay quiet. They perform the ritual, and their silence reinforces everyone else's belief that the ritual must work. Because if it didn't, someone would have said something. Socially shared superstition doesn't gain power from being true. It gains power from being shared. And the more people who share it, the more legitimate it appears. Not because the evidence changed. Because the consensus did. And consensus in groups often matters more than correctness. Family transmission of superstition. How do superstitions survive generations? They're not taught in schools. They're not written in official guides. But a child grows up knocking on wood, avoiding cracks in sidewalks and refusing to open umbrellas indoors. They didn't decide to believe these things. They absorbed them. From parents, from grandparents, from family culture that never questioned where the beliefs came from or whether they were true. Family transmission of superstition is the process by which superstitious beliefs are passed down through familial relationships, often without explicit instruction. Children watch adults perform rituals. They copy them. The adults explain sometimes, but often they don't. The child just learns this is what we do. And what we do becomes what they do. The belief transfers through behavior before it ever becomes conscious thought. The transmission is particularly strong because it happens early. A young child doesn't evaluate superstition rationally. They don't question why their parent knocks on wood. They just see it as part of reality, like eating with utensils or saying thank you. It's a behavior that adults model, so it must be correct. And by the time the child is old enough to question, the behavior is already habit. What makes family transmission powerful is emotional attachment. Superstitions aren't just beliefs. They're connections to family. A grandmother taught you to avoid walking under ladders. Continuing the practice feels like honoring her. Abandoning it feels like rejecting her. The superstition becomes intertwined with love and memory. And those bonds are stronger than logic. The transmission also creates generational continuity. Families develop their own specific superstitions, unique rituals that other families don't practice. These become markers of family identity, something that distinguishes your family from others. And preserving them, even when you don't believe in them, becomes a way of preserving family itself. Where family transmission becomes problematic is when harmful superstitions are passed down alongside harmless ones. Not all superstitions are neutral. Some create anxiety. Some limit behavior unnecessarily. Some perpetuate prejudice. But because they come from family, they're harder to challenge. Rejecting them feels like rejecting heritage. So they persist, generation after generation, unchallenged because questioning them would mean questioning family. Family transmission of superstition doesn't require belief. It requires behavior. And behavior repeated enough times eventually feels like belief. By the time you're an adult, you might not remember why you knock on wood. You just know you do, because someone you love did. And that's reason enough. Decision deferral to signs. You're facing a decision. A real one with real consequences. You could analyze it. Weigh the options. Consider the outcomes. But instead you wait. You look for a sign. Something external that will tell you what to do. And until that sign appears, the decision stays suspended. Decision deferral to signs is the practice of postponing choices until a perceived omen or signal appears, transferring responsibility for the decision from yourself to external randomness. The sign can be anything. A chance encounter, a specific number, a weather pattern. Something that feels meaningful enough to interpret as guidance. And once interpreted, it dictates your choice. The deferral happens most often with difficult decisions. High-stakes choices where either option carries risk. Choosing feels dangerous, so you don't. You wait for the universe to choose for you. A coin lands heads and you take the job. A bird flies left and you end the relationship. The sign didn't provide information, but it provided permission. And permission feels easier than responsibility. What makes this pattern seductive is how it relieves decision anxiety. Making choices requires accepting uncertainty. You might be wrong. You might regret it. But if a sign told you what to do, the outcome isn't your fault. The sign guided you. You were just following direction. The deferral protects you from blame, both external and internal. The practice also reveals a deeper fear of autonomy. Some people don't want to decide. They want to be told. Signs provide that external authority. They convert choice into obedience. You're not making a decision. You're interpreting guidance. And interpreting feels passive, even when the interpretation itself is an active choice. Where decision deferral becomes destructive is when it replaces judgment entirely. You stop evaluating options. You just wait for signs. And because signs are subjective, you can find them anywhere. A random event becomes meaningful because you need it to be. The sign didn't guide your decision. Your need for guidance created the sign. You've delegated choice to randomness and called it fate. Decision deferral to signs doesn't make better decisions. It makes easier ones. Easier emotionally, not practically. You've avoided the discomfort of choosing, but you haven't avoided the consequences. And when the outcome is bad, you can't blame the sign, because the sign was never real. It was just a way to avoid admitting you were always the one deciding. Illness-linked superstitious control. Medicine isn't enough. The doctors have a plan. The treatment is clear. But illness feels too big, too random, too frightening to leave entirely to science. So people add rituals. Small acts of control that have nothing to do with healing, but everything to do with feeling like they're fighting back. Illness-linked superstitious control is the use of rituals and superstitious behaviors to manage the psychological stress of sickness, creating a sense of agency in situations where medical outcomes feel uncertain. The rituals don't replace medicine. They supplement it. A patient takes their medication and also performs a daily ritual. Wears a specific item. Follows a symbolic routine. The medicine treats the body. The ritual treats the mind. The behavior makes sense psychologically. Illness strips control. You can't will yourself healthy. You can't force recovery through effort alone. But you can perform rituals. And rituals feel like action. They give you something to do beyond waiting. Something that makes you feel involved in your own recovery, even when the involvement is symbolic. Athletes injure themselves and develop healing rituals. They visualize recovery in specific ways. They follow superstitious routines during rehabilitation. The physical therapy is necessary, but the ritual makes the waiting bearable. It gives structure to uncertainty. And structure, even arbitrary structure, can reduce anxiety. What makes illness-linked superstitious control problematic is when it interferes with treatment. Someone believes a ritual is more important than medicine. They skip doses to perform the ritual properly. Or they refuse certain treatments because they conflict with superstitious beliefs. The ritual was supposed to supplement care. Instead, it's replaced it. The pattern also creates false attributions. Someone recovers while following a ritual. They credit the ritual alongside the medicine. Next time they're sick, they rely more heavily on the ritual. If it worked once, they think it must have power. But the medicine worked. The ritual was just present. The correlation gets mistaken for causation. And that mistake can be dangerous. Illness-linked superstitious control doesn't heal. It copes. And coping is valuable. Rituals that reduce stress without harming treatment can improve outcomes indirectly. Less anxiety means better adherence to medical plans. Better mental state supports physical recovery. But the moment the ritual becomes the treatment, coping has turned into delusion. And delusion, in matters of health, can be fatal. Relationship jinx belief. Every relationship ends the same way. Same pattern. Same timeline. Same outcome. It's happened enough times that you've stopped calling it coincidence. You're convinced there's something about you, something cursed, that guarantees failure. Not just bad luck. A relationship jinx. And the belief shapes every new connection before it even begins. Relationship jinx belief is the conviction that romantic relationships are destined to fail because of a personal curse or pattern you can't escape. The belief forms through selective memory. You remember the endings. You forget the differences. 3 relationships ended around the 6-month mark. But they ended for different reasons, in different ways with different people. The timeline match. Nothing else did. but the mind ignores context and sees pattern. What makes relationship jinx belief destructive is how it becomes self-fulfilling. If you believe relationships will fail, you enter them defensively. You hold back. You look for signs of the inevitable ending. And when you're constantly watching for failure, you miss opportunities for connection. The relationship doesn't fail because you're jinxed. It fails because your belief in the jinx made genuine intimacy impossible. The pattern also protects the ego. If you're jinxed, failures aren't your responsibility. You didn't choose poorly. You didn't communicate badly. You didn't sabotage things. The jinx did. And that explanation, however false, feels better than examining your own behavior. It's easier to blame a curse than to recognize patterns you could change. The belief intensifies with each new relationship. Someone who believes they're jinxed enters dating expecting confirmation. They interpret normal conflicts as evidence. A minor argument becomes proof the jinx is activating. A partner's bad mood becomes the beginning of the end. They're not experiencing the relationship. They're watching for the curse to manifest. And that surveillance guarantees they'll find what they're looking for. Breaking relationship jinx belief requires confronting randomness. Relationships end. Sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes for bad ones. Sometimes because of timing, circumstance, or simple incompatibility. None of that means you're cursed. It means relationships are complex and outcomes are unpredictable. But accepting unpredictability means accepting vulnerability. And for people who've built an entire explanation around the jinx, vulnerability feels more dangerous than the curse itself. Travel safety rituals. Before every flight, same routine. Check the itinerary 3 times. Touch a specific item. Say a particular phrase. The ritual has nothing to do with aviation safety. But it has everything to do with feeling like you've done something to protect yourself before surrendering control to forces you can't manage. Travel safety rituals are superstitious behaviors performed before journeys to create a sense of protection against harm. The rituals vary. Some people carry lucky items. Others follow specific sequences. Some avoid talking about the trip beforehand. The actions don't reduce risk, but they reduce the feeling of risk. And when you're about to travel thousands of miles in a metal tube or drive through unfamiliar territory, feeling safer becomes its own goal. The behavior intensifies with fear of flying. Someone anxious about air travel develops elaborate pre-flight routines. They pack in a specific order. They arrive at the airport at a specific time. They sit in a specific seat if possible. None of this affects the flight's safety. But performing the ritual makes boarding feel manageable. The routine converts panic into procedure. What makes travel safety rituals compelling is how they exploit statistical safety. Flying is incredibly safe. Most trips are uneventful. So every time you perform the ritual and arrive safely, the ritual gets credit. The pattern reinforces itself. You flew, you were safe. The ritual worked. Except the safety had nothing to do with the ritual. It was always the likeliest outcome. The rituals also create dependency. Someone who's flown dozens of times with their lucky item suddenly forgets it. Panic sets in. The flight feels dangerous now, not because anything changed about the aircraft, but because the psychological anchor is missing. The ritual that was supposed to provide comfort has become a source of anxiety. Without it, they feel exposed. Where travel safety rituals become problematic is when they replace actual preparation. Someone focuses so much on the ritual that they forget practical safety measures. They don't check weather. They don't plan routes. They don't prepare for delays. The ritual makes them feel protected, so they stop doing things that actually matter. The false security becomes real vulnerability. Travel safety rituals don't protect you. They comfort you. And comfort has value. But when comfort becomes requirement, when you can't travel without the ritual, you've stopped managing fear. Fear is managing you. Exam rituals. What do you do the night before a test? Some people study, but others perform rituals. They sleep with their textbook under the pillow. They wear the same clothes they wore during the last successful exam. They eat specific foods. They follow sequences that have nothing to do with knowledge retention, but everything to do with managing the anxiety of being evaluated. Exam rituals are superstitious behaviors students develop around testing, believing these actions will improve performance or prevent failure. The rituals start small. A student uses the same pen for multiple exams. It becomes their testing pen. They used it when they did well, so they use it again. Eventually, taking a test without that pen feels like a disadvantage. The pattern spreads across entire academic careers. Students develop morning of routines, specific breakfasts, particular study spots, exact timing for review. Some of this is practical. Routine reduces decision fatigue. But when the routine crosses into ritual, when deviating from it triggers panic, it's no longer about efficiency. It's about superstition. What makes exam rituals understandable is the high-stakes nature of testing. Performance on a single exam can determine grades, opportunities, futures. That pressure creates desperation for any edge. And when you can't control how difficult the test will be or what questions will appear, controlling your preparation ritual feels like the next best thing. The problem is displacement. Time spent on rituals is time not spent studying. A student might spend an hour organizing their materials in a specific way, convinced the organization will help. But the hour spent arranging could have been used for actual review. The ritual provides the feeling of preparation without the substance of it. Exam rituals also fail to address the real source of anxiety. Students perform rituals to feel less nervous, but the nerves come from uncertainty about knowledge, not from failing to follow a sequence. The ritual is a distraction, not a solution. And distractions, however comforting, don't improve understanding or recall. The healthiest exam preparation is studying and rest. Everything else is performance. And performance, when it becomes compulsive, stops serving the student and starts controlling them. Superstitious consumption. You buy things you don't need because you believe they'll bring good fortune. A lucky charm. A specific brand worn during past successes. An item associated with a positive outcome. The purchase isn't about function. It's about hope. And hope, when it comes wrapped in a product, is easy to sell. Superstitious consumption is the practice of purchasing items believed to attract luck or improve outcomes, turning superstition into a commercial transaction. The market for lucky objects is vast. Crystals, amulets, clothing, accessories. None of them work. But all of them sell. Because people aren't buying the object. They're buying the belief that the object will change their circumstances. The pattern is especially visible around major life events. Someone starting a new job buys a lucky tie. Another person facing a big decision purchases a charm. The item becomes part of their ritual. And because the ritual feels important, the item feels necessary. The purchase is justified not by utility but by symbolic value. What makes superstitious consumption powerful is how it converts agency into purchase. You can't control the outcome, but you can buy something associated with success. The purchase feels like action, like you're doing something to improve your odds. And doing something, even something meaningless, feels better than doing nothing. The behavior also exploits desperation. People facing uncertain outcomes are vulnerable to anything that promises advantage. A student before exams, an athlete before competition, a patient awaiting results. They're in states where hope is precious and skepticism is expensive. So they buy. They buy because rejecting the possibility of luck feels like rejecting hope itself. Where superstitious consumption becomes destructive is when it replaces real preparation or appropriate action. Someone spends money on lucky objects instead of investing in tools or training that would actually help. The charm was supposed to supplement effort. Instead, it substituted for it. and substitution doesn't deliver results. Superstitious consumption also creates a cycle. Buy a lucky item, good thing happens. Credit the item. Next challenge, buy another. The collection grows. The belief strengthens. And the cost, both financial and psychological, accumulates. You're not building luck. You're building dependency on objects that were never lucky to begin with. Protective phrase repetition. Say it once and it's a statement. Say it 3 times and it's a spell. You find yourself repeating phrases not because you forgot to say them, because saying them once doesn't feel complete. The words need repetition to carry weight. To work. To protect. Protective phrase repetition is the compulsion to repeat specific words or sentences multiple times, believing the repetition activates their protective power. The phrases vary. Some are traditional. Others are personal. What they share is the conviction that speaking them once isn't enough. The magic requires multiples. 3 times, 7 times, until it feels right. The behavior shows up in various forms. Someone worried about a loved one repeats a protective phrase. A person facing danger whispers reassuring words in sets. The repetition isn't for communication. It's for ritual. The words aren't meant to inform. They're meant to shield. What drives protective phrase repetition is anxiety-seeking structure. Repeating something gives you control. You can't control the outcome you're worried about. But you can control how many times you say the words. The repetition becomes a container for fear. As long as you're repeating, you're doing something. And doing something feels better than helpless waiting. The pattern intensifies under stress. Someone facing an uncertain situation starts repeating protective phrases more frequently. More urgently. The phrases become mantras. And mantras, when repeated enough, start to feel powerful. Not because they change external reality, because they change internal state. The rhythm soothes. The familiarity comforts. But comfort and protection aren't the same thing. Where protective phrase repetition becomes problematic is when it crosses into compulsion. The phrases stop being optional. You have to say them. Missing a repetition triggers anxiety. The words that were supposed to provide protection now create stress when they're not performed correctly. The ritual has reversed. It's not protecting you from external threats. It's threatening you with internal consequences if you don't comply. Protective phrase repetition doesn't guard against harm. It manages the feeling of vulnerability. And that management, when it's flexible and occasional, can be adaptive. But when it's rigid and constant, it's no longer coping. It's captivity. You're not protecting yourself through words. You're imprisoned by them. False security through ritual. The ritual makes you feel safe. Check the locks. Count to 10. Touch the wall. The sequence doesn't actually secure your home or improve your circumstances. But completing it creates a sense of protection. And that sense, however false, makes the night more bearable. False security through ritual is the illusion of safety created by performing superstitious actions, where the ritual provides psychological comfort without addressing actual risk. The ritual doesn't make you safer. It makes you feel safer. And feeling safer can be enough to function. Until it isn't. The behavior is seductive because it works emotionally. Someone anxious about home security performs a checking ritual. The ritual reduces anxiety temporarily. The reduction feels like the ritual worked. So they perform it again. The pattern reinforces. Eventually the ritual becomes the source of security. Not locks. Not alarms. The ritual. And when security depends on ritual, real security measures get neglected. What makes false security dangerous is how it misdirects attention. You're focused on completing the ritual correctly. You're not focused on whether the actual security measures are adequate. The ritual creates a feeling of having addressed the problem. But feelings aren't facts. And false security is often worse than no security because it prevents you from recognizing real vulnerabilities. The pattern appears across contexts. Someone performs a health ritual believing it protects them from illness. They skip actual preventive care. Another person follows a safety ritual before driving, convinced it prevents accidents. They don't maintain their vehicle. The ritual provides comfort. But the comfort masks neglect. False security through ritual also creates brittleness. When the ritual is disrupted, the sense of safety collapses entirely. Someone can't complete their checking sequence. Panic sets in. They feel exposed, unsafe. Not because the situation changed, because the ritual that made them feel protected is unavailable. The security was never real, but the dependence on it was. The cost of false security is twofold. First, you invest time and energy in rituals that don't protect you. Second, you fail to invest in measures that would. The ritual occupies the space that actual preparation should fill. And space occupied by ritual can't be used for reality. You've built a fortress of gestures. And gestures, no matter how elaborate, don't keep you safe when real threats arrive. Ritual failure panic. You missed a step. The routine you followed for months, maybe years, got interrupted. Someone called. You got distracted. It doesn't matter why. What matters is the ritual didn't complete. And now you're not just continuing your day. You're spiraling. Because incomplete rituals feel dangerous. Ritual failure panic is the intense anxiety triggered when a superstitious routine cannot be performed correctly or completely. The panic isn't proportional to the actual consequence. Missing a step in a meaningless sequence shouldn't matter. But it does. Because you've trained yourself to believe the ritual provides protection or success. Without it, you feel exposed. The response is immediate. Someone forgets their lucky item before an important event. They don't just feel unprepared. They feel doomed. The event hasn't happened yet. Nothing has changed except the absence of an object that was never doing anything. But the panic is real. The ritual's absence feels like a guarantee of failure. What makes ritual failure panic destructive is how it confirms the ritual's importance. The panic itself becomes evidence that the ritual was necessary. You feel terrible because you missed it. That terrible feeling proves it mattered. But the feeling isn't proof of the ritual's power. It's proof of your dependency. You've created a psychological need, and now the need punishes you for not meeting it. The panic also distorts performance. Someone enters a situation without their ritual. They're already anxious about the missing routine. That anxiety affects their focus. Their behavior changes. And if the outcome is negative, they don't blame the anxiety. They blame the missing ritual. The ritual gets credit for preventing what the anxiety about the ritual actually caused. Where ritual failure panic becomes particularly insidious is in how it prevents testing. You never discover whether you can succeed without the ritual because the panic about missing it sabotages performance before you have a chance. The ritual survives untested, and untested beliefs are the hardest to break. Ritual failure panic doesn't mean the ritual was working. It means you've become dependent. And dependency, when it's built on nothing real, is just fear with a routine attacked. Superstitious group norms. The team has rules, not written ones, not official policies, but everyone knows them. Don't mention the goal before it's achieved. Don't sit in certain seats. Follow specific per-meeting routines. These aren't strategies. They're superstitions. And they're enforced not through authority but through collective belief. Superstitious group norms are shared superstitious beliefs that become embedded in group culture, creating unofficial rules that members follow to maintain belonging and group cohesion. The norms start with individuals. One person's ritual becomes visible. Others notice. They copy. Soon, the entire group is performing the same superstition. And once it's collective, it's no longer optional. What makes group norms powerful is social pressure. Individual superstitions can be abandoned privately, but group superstitions are public. Violating them means standing out, explaining yourself, defending your choice not to participate. And that defense, however rational, marks you as different. Most people would rather follow a meaningless ritual than become the person who broke group tradition. The norms also create identity. Teams with shared superstitions aren't just working together. They're bonded by belief. The ritual isn't about luck anymore. It's about membership. You perform the superstition because that's what this group does. And doing what the group does makes you part of the group. The ritual becomes the price of belonging. What makes superstitious group norms particularly resistant to change is collective investment. A single person might recognize the superstition is pointless. But the group has invested in it, built culture around it, told stories about times it worked. Challenging the superstition means challenging shared history. And shared history, even when it's built on falsehood, creates bonds that facts can't easily break. The danger is groupthink. When superstition becomes norm, dissent becomes betrayal. Someone recognizes the ritual is meaningless, but they can't say so without disrupting group harmony. So they stay silent. They participate. And their silence reinforces everyone else's belief that the ritual must be valuable. Because if it wasn't, someone would have objected. Superstitious group norms don't make groups more effective. They make groups more cohesive. And cohesion has value. But when cohesion requires conformity to irrational beliefs, the group has traded effectiveness for comfort. And comfort in the long run doesn't deliver results. Anxiety reduction via symbolism. Why does holding an object calm you down? It's not medication. It's not therapy. It's a stone, a coin, a piece of fabric. But when you're anxious and you hold it, something shifts. The anxiety doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable. And that management, however symbolic, feels real. Anxiety reduction via symbolism is the use of objects or symbolic actions to lower stress, where the calming effect comes not from the object's properties, but from the meaning assigned to it. The object doesn't have power, but your belief that it does creates psychological change. And psychological change, regardless of source, affects how you feel. The mechanism is association and focus. You've linked the object to calm states. Maybe someone gave it to you during a peaceful time. Maybe you held it when you successfully managed anxiety before. The brain learns the connection. Object equals calm. So when you're anxious and you hold the object, the association activates. Your physiology responds to the belief, not the object. The practice appears across cultures. Worry stones, prayer beads, comfort items. These aren't just decorative. They're tools, not for changing external circumstances, for changing internal states. Someone facing a stressful situation holds their symbolic object. Their breathing slows. Their focus narrows. The object didn't reduce the stress, but it redirected attention, and redirected attention can reduce the feeling of stress. What makes symbolism effective is how it bypasses rational thought. You can't always think your way out of anxiety, but you can hold something, touch something, focus on something tangible. The symbolism provides a concrete anchor in a moment of abstract fear. And concrete anchors, even arbitrary ones, can ground you. Where anxiety reduction via symbolism becomes problematic is when it replaces actual coping strategies. Someone relies entirely on a symbolic object. They don't develop real skills for managing stress. The object becomes their only tool. And when the object isn't available, they have nothing. The symbolism that was supposed to support them has become the only support they have. Symbolism can reduce anxiety. But reduction isn't resolution. The object calms you. It doesn't address the source of stress. And stress unaddressed doesn't disappear. It waits. The symbol buys time. but time bought through symbolisms still requires you to eventually face what you're avoiding. Identity through ritual. The ritual defines who you are, not your job, not your relationships. The sequence of actions you perform every morning, the specific way you prepare for challenges, the routines you won't break. These aren't habits, they're identity. An identity built on ritual becomes inseparable from the ritual itself. Identity through ritual is the phenomenon where personal identity becomes intertwined with superstitious behaviors, making the rituals feel essential to selfhood rather than optional practices. You're not someone who performs this ritual. You're someone who is this ritual. And being the ritual means you can't stop without losing yourself. The fusion happens gradually. You start a ritual for practical reasons. It works, or seems to. You continue it. Over time, the ritual stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The athlete who bounces the ball 3 times isn't just following a routine. They're being the kind of athlete who bounces the ball 3 times. The ritual has merged with identity. What makes identity-ritual fusion powerful is how it resists change. Challenging the ritual means challenging self. Abandoning it feels like abandoning who you are. You're not just breaking a habit, you're dismantling identity. An identity, even when it's built on superstition, provides stability. Questioning it creates existential discomfort that most people avoid. The pattern also limits growth. When identity depends on specific rituals, changing those rituals threatens continuity of self. Someone might recognize their pre-performance routine is excessive, but altering it feels like becoming a different person. So they keep the ritual. They protect identity, and in protecting identity, they prevent evolution. Where identity through ritual becomes truly problematic is when the ritual demands more than it returns. The ritual that once took minutes now takes hours. The routine that was simple has become elaborate. But you can't reduce it, because the ritual isn't just behavior anymore. It's who you are, and who you are doesn't get downsized, even when it should. Identity through ritual creates the illusion of consistency. You're the same person because you do the same things, but consistency built on ritual isn't real consistency. It's performance, and performance, when it becomes identity, traps you in patterns you can never outgrow. Personal meaning ritualization. Everyone else sees a routine. You see significance. The sequence means something to you that it doesn't mean to others. That specific timing. That particular order. That exact repetition. It's not superstition. It's personal. It's meaningful. And meaning, once attacked, makes the ritual impossible to abandon. Personal meaning ritualization is the process of assigning deep personal significance to rituals that have no inherent meaning, transforming arbitrary actions into sacred practices. The ritual isn't culturally inherited, it's individually created. And individual creation makes it feel more authentic, more important than borrowed superstitions. The meaning can come from anywhere. You performed a sequence during a significant moment. The moment was meaningful. So the sequence becomes meaningful too. Next time you face something similar, you repeat the sequence. The ritual becomes your way of honoring that first moment, of bringing its energy forward, of making the past present. What makes personal meaning ritualization compelling is ownership. This is your ritual, not society's, not traditions. Yours. You created it. You maintain it. And ownership creates investment. You're not just following a rule someone else made. You're upholding something you built. And what you build feels more valuable than what you inherit. The ritual also becomes a private language, a way of communicating with yourself across time. Performing it today connects you to the version of yourself who performed it before. It creates continuity, thread between moments. And that thread, however thin, feels like it holds you together. Where personal meaning ritualization becomes destructive is when the meaning becomes burden. The ritual that was supposed to honor something important now controls you. You can't skip it. Can't modify it. The meaning you assigned has become obligation. An obligation to self-imposed meaning is still obligation. The ritual you created to add significance has become the thing making life rigid. Personal meaning ritualization doesn't make moments more significant. It makes rituals more necessary. And necessary rituals, even personally meaningful ones, eventually stop serving you and start requiring service. Everyday micro-superstitions. You don't think you're superstitious. You don't avoid ladders or believe in curses. You're rational. Logical. But you still double-tap your phone screen even when the first tap registered. You still say a phrase when you see a specific time. You still follow small routines that have no functional purpose. These aren't superstitions. They're just things you do. Except they are superstitions. Just smaller ones. Everyday micro-superstitions are tiny superstitious behaviors so normalized that people don't recognize them as superstitious. They're too small to seem significant. Too casual to seem serious. But they're still based on the same logic. This action affects that outcome. This behavior provides that protection. The scale is different. The mechanism is the same. The behaviors hide in plain sight. Someone always puts their phone screen down. Not for privacy. Because screen up feels unlucky. Another person avoids saying certain words on specific days. A third has a routine for closing apps that goes beyond functionality. These actions take seconds. So they seem harmless. But harmlessness isn't the point. Irrationality is. What makes micro-superstitions insidious is their invisibility. Big superstitions are obvious. You can identify them and choose whether to follow them. Micro-superstitions operate below conscious awareness. You perform them automatically. And automatic behaviors are harder to examine than deliberate ones. By the time you notice you're doing them, they're already habits. The accumulation matters. One micro-superstition is meaningless. 20 of them shape your day. Each one takes a few seconds. Together they add minutes. More importantly, they add mental overhead. Every micro-superstition is a small rule you're following. A tiny constraint on behavior. And constraints accumulate even when individually minor. Micro-superstitions also reveal deeper patterns. If you perform small irrational rituals, you're prone to larger ones. The thinking that creates double tapping is the same thinking that creates elaborate pre-performance routines. The scale differs. The vulnerability is identical, and vulnerabilities, once established, tend to expand. Everyday micro-superstitions don't feel like superstitions because they're small. But small irrationalities are still irrational, and rationality isn't something you practice only in big decisions. It's something you practice constantly. Or you don't practice it at all.